Okay, my friends, this is going to be stunning. This is the Internet Archive, and they specialize in keeping research available to researchers. And they say they provide free access to researchers, historians, scholars, people with print disabilities, general public. The mission is to provide universal access to all knowledge. So I am going to be showing you something in the Velikovsky archive, because they make the best presentation. And this is, Fair Use Act, so I want it for education exactly like they do. All right. Get ready. We're going to be listening to this. I'm going to start with the preface. All right, and here it is. And this is the Immanuel Velikovsky, Worlds in Collision. And it goes through, very nicely presented by somebody named James Cameron Stewart. Very nice speaking voice, nice flow. So here it goes. Just listen to the beginning preface.
By Immanuel Velikovsky. Narrated by James Cameron Stewart.
Worlds in Collision.
Publisher's Preface. Worlds in Collision is a special and extraordinary book, not only by its contents, but also by the response it has received. It is one of the few scientific books of the past centuries that have a direct, profound importance for humanity, individuals and society alike. In fact, it is a book that puts our present view of the world on a whole new fundament, not in some abstract, specialized disciplines remote from practical life, but in a broad range of areas like astronomy, cosmology, physics, geology, paleontology, biology, history, archaeology, literature, ethnology, theology, mythology, psychology. And in addition, it has an important influence on the way man sees himself individually and socially. It is the first time in centuries that a scientist didn't choose the direct way to his specialized colleagues in order to make the results of his research known, but addressed himself to the general public in a simple and clear language and presentation, for which he was harshly punished by the scientific establishment. It is exactly this reaction from...
I just want to say something. That is exactly the reaction I got. And he got it. He was absolutely destroyed. Now, I have evidence coming out of my ears, and I'm still being destroyed. So this is not an easy thing to do.
Representatives of the objective sciences that even match some medieval practices, which shows that this book deeply shakes the foundations of our knowledge and belief. Because of this book being so special, it has deeply penetrated the consciousness of many people. Others, however, have preferred to forget it, or at least would like to do so. Due to this purposeful oblivion, a younger generation doesn't even know about it anymore, although today, almost 60 years after its first publication, it hasn't become less of a subject. On the contrary, due to new results of scientific research and recent geological and climatic developments, its importance has even increased. This, too, is something special in the flood of today's short-lived literary and scientific flash-in-the-pans. It is important for every one of us, and for science at large, to deal with this book. Therefore, we are happy to take upon ourselves the responsible task of making the complete works of Immanuel Velikovsky, not just this book, available to the public again in its unchanged form. Publishing this book, and this, unfortunately, also is something special for non-fiction, has required a fair amount of courage, which we proudly and consciously muster up.
All right, that's true. It takes courage to do this, especially if you're in this realm. As whatever they do, they're making this archive. But once you get into the academic realm, you really can be destroyed just like that, because they have what they call peer review, and if they just gang up on it, you're done. It's all over, and you can't make. It's really systemic. And they went after him and forced him to take the book off the bookshelves after 11 weeks. It's number one on a New York Times bestseller list. Number one, 11 weeks in a row. And they told the publisher, which was Macmillan, I believe, that if they don't take it off the bookshelves, we will never buy another book from you. And they took it off. And then somebody else picked up on it, but by that time, they had just really destroyed him and, raised such a fuss that he was considered a whack job. Okay, so let's go on to the next preface.
Preface, 1965, to the paperback edition of Worlds in Collision. First published in 1950, this book was left unchanged in all subsequent printings, nor have any textual changes been made in this paperbound edition. This was so by design. I wished to keep the text in its original form in order that, unaltered, it should face all subsequent discoveries in the fields it covers or touches upon. Should there have been changes, one would be unable to judge to what extent a book, heretical in 1950, could measure up to later developments. In 1950, it was generally assumed that the fundamentals of science were all known, and that only details and decimals were left to fill in. In the same year, a cosmologist, certainly not of a conservative bent of mind, Fred Hoyle, wrote in the conclusion of his book, The Nature of the Universe, "Is it likely that any astonishing new developments are lying in wait for us? Is it possible that the cosmology of 500 years hence will extend as far beyond our present beliefs as our cosmology goes beyond that of Newton?" And he continued, "I doubt whether this will be so. I am prepared to believe that there will be many advances in the detailed understanding of matters that still baffle us, but by and large, I think that our present picture will turn out to bear an approximate resemblance to the cosmologies of the future." And he referred to the limitations of optical means in penetrating the depth of space. The years that have passed since the publication of Worlds in Collision have seen the first great achievements in radio astronomy, the discoveries of the International Geophysical Year, and the dawn of the space age. The picture has changed completely. Signs of recent violence, disruption, and fragmentation have been observed on Earth and elsewhere in the solar system. A submarine gigantic canyon that runs almost twice around the globe, a sign of a global twist, a layer of ash of extraterrestrial origin underlying all oceans, paleomagnetic evidence that the magnetic poles were suddenly and repeatedly reversed, and it is claimed the terrestrial axis with them, gases escaping from some craters on the moon thought to be cooled to its center, an exceedingly high surface heat of Venus. Furthermore, with the discovery of radio signals arriving from Jupiter, of the existence of a magnetosphere surrounding the Earth, of the solar plasma, of the net charge on the Sun, and of the magnetic field permeating the interplanetary space, decisive evidence has come up that the solar system, and the universe in general, are not electromagnetically sterile, a basic change in the understanding of the universe, its nature, and the forces active in it. The words found in the preface to the 1950 edition, designating the work as heresy in realms where the names of Newton and Darwin reign supreme, should no longer evoke the same spontaneous rejection on the part of even the most conservative in science, unless it is a defense mechanism devised to protect an inner realization of incertitude. What, to the scientist, constitutes a really satisfactory sort of success for a theory? The answer lies largely in the words generality, elegance, control, and prediction. As to generality, hardly anyone raised an objection. Possibly there was some elegance in the timing. When these words were written in 1960, 10 years after the publication of my book and the great opposition it provoked, some of the most compelling data were radioed by the space vehicle Pioneer 5. I would like to relate here a few details about the control and prediction of two crucial tests decisive for this book. Early in my work, I came to the understanding that Venus is a newcomer to the planetary family, that it had a stormy, if only short, history, and that it must still be very hot and giving off heat. Further, that it must be surrounded by a very extensive envelope of hydrocarbon, petroleum, gases, and dust. Such claims were in total disagreement with what was known in 1946 when I completed the manuscript of the work, or in 1950 when it was published. To stress the crucial nature of these claims, they were put under the headings "The Gases of Venus" and "The Thermal Balance of Venus," immediately preceding the section "The End." Should I be right in these claims, the entire chain of deductions, of which the identification of the extraterrestrial agent of the paroxysms described is but the final ring, is strengthened. And since these crucial claims were in flagrant discord with accepted values, in case of confirmation, they ought not to be denoted as lucky guesses. As late as 1959, Venus's ground temperature was calculated to be only 17 degrees Celsius, 3 degrees above the mean annual temperature of the Earth. But by 1961, from the nature of the radio signals emitted by Venus, it was found that Venus's ground temperature is about 315 degrees Celsius, or 600 degrees Fahrenheit. Dr. F.D. Drake of the National Radio Astronomy Observatory, responsible for this reading, wrote, "We would have expected a temperature only slightly greater than that of the Earth, and the find was a surprise in a field in which the fewest surprises were expected." There was admittedly no satisfactory explanation of such high temperature of Venus in the frame.
I just want to tell you, there is a satisfactory explanation. Venus spins backwards, reverse. It still has to go through the solar system and scrub everything that's in front of it. But normally, it rolls like a tire rolling down the road. So it just keeps rolling, just like it was rolling up against a wall, and it rolls down the road. Well, this is going backwards. So it's going forward, and the tires are spinning backwards, which is the atmosphere. And that's why it's extremely hot. Now, our atmosphere is also very hot. It's 2,700 degrees out there. But I don't know how hot it is. Venus's outer ionosphere, I guess you'd call it. How hot would that be? It'd be a bazillion degrees. Because the sun is the same way. The sun is only 10,000 on the surface, and it's millions in the corona, because that's where the scrub zone is. It has to scrub just like we do. It's spinning and it's being pulled on the arm of the Milky Way and all that stuff. So that's what creates that increased temperature. I believe that's a reasonable explanation. I also believe, I'm going to tell you right now, I believe Venus was literally born like a normal birth from from Jupiter, from the Great Red Spot. I've shown it dozens of times. It's exactly identical to a vagina. It claims that it was born from the feared god Jupiter and sent to Earth to destroy Earth, basically to wipe out all the giants and all those monsters that they had created from being crazy. Basically, the gods that were put in charge of our universe took advantage of it and said, let's have 200 of us all sign a pact and we'll just do it and have a great time, and yeah, screw this, who cares? What's he going to do? Well, it ended up causing, this gets really involved, because the same guy that caused all this havoc, I believe, was Zeus, who was Jupiter. And he's the one that sent Venus to wipe all this stuff off the face of the planet. And he's the one that started all this stuff, as far as I can determine. He's the one that came down and had sex with all the women, and then they had monsters and giants and stuff. But so he must have decided, whoops, we made a mistake. I'm going to clean it all off and we'll start over again. That's how I'm looking at it right now. And then what about Jesus Christ? I'm just going to tell you right up front, because people take a bad taste in their mouth. They're like, I don't believe in Jesus Christ, or I don't believe in God or any of that stuff. I believe there was a God, obviously, and he said, go down there and rule these people and take care of them, and here's some rules. And then they came down and then they decided, well, the rules don't apply, and they took advantage of the people, basically, and just started wars and hatred and violence, and it just never ended. And it hasn't ended yet, as we can see every day. So that's the place I'm coming from. And Jesus' position in this is he came to warn us. This stuff is real. By the time Jesus came, nobody even believed any of this stuff. It was all nonsense. They didn't believe in dragons. They didn't believe in any. So yeah, some of them did. You know, there was some cults here and there. But the main people had been brainwashed away from this. And, you know, I don't know how much they believe, to be perfectly honest with you. But I did see one discussion about the Romans. And I think they were coming into Tangiers. I'm not sure where it was, but I think it was Tangiers. And they had told them when they arrived that not to desecrate this one area because it was where their king lived, who was a giant. And they said, no, there's no such thing. And they said, went out and they dug it up, and yes, it was a giant, a very big giant. And they were everywhere. They were all over. And I don't know if they were here after the flood very much, but I know they were here definitely before the flood in copious quantities. It appears, and they're all over the place. So let's get back to Velikovsky. All right, so don't forget, this is his preface.
Of the accepted notions. Greenhouse effect could not explain so high a temperature, nor could radioactivity decaying for billions of years. The Mariner 2, the space vehicle that passed Venus in December 1962, was instrumented to detect whether the heat is real and as high as 600 degrees. It found it real and a full 800 degrees. It found also that the night side of Venus is, if anything, hotter than the day side, and that light does not penetrate the cloud cover. It must be gloomy and bleak under this cover, it is stated in the Mariner report by the Jet Propulsion Laboratory. Very little greenhouse effect could realize itself under such conditions. The other crucial test concerned the gaseous envelope of the planet. In 1946, 4 years before the publication of this book, I directed a request and inquiry to Professor R. Wilt of Yale and the late Professor W.S. Adams of Mount Wilson and Palomar Observatories, foremost authorities on the subject of planetary atmosphere, indicating that the presence of hydrocarbon gases and dust in the cloud envelope of Venus would constitute a crucial test for the cosmological concepts evolved from the study of historical sources. Wilt wrote on September the 13th, 1946, "The absorption spectrum of Venus's atmosphere cannot be interpreted as resulting from gaseous hydrocarbons." Adams answered, "There is no evidence of the presence of hydrocarbon gas in the atmosphere of Venus." I must have been completely firm in my belief of not having made a wrong deduction from the first premise of global catastrophe to the last one of identifying the agent, to have chosen to print, in disregard of the expert opinions, "On the basis of this research, I assume that Venus must be rich in petroleum gases." On February the 26th, 1963, making known the results of the Mariner probe, Dr. Homer Newell of NASA announced that, in the judgment of those responsible for that part of the program, Venus is enshrouded in an envelope of hydrocarbon gases and dust 15 miles thick, 45 miles above the ground of the planet. It was acknowledged as very puzzling that Venus should have such a massive atmosphere a score of times heavier than the terrestrial atmosphere, that it should have taken the form of an envelope 45 miles above the surface of the planet, and that it should consist of heavy molecules of hydrocarbon gases and dust. It was also found that Venus rotates retrogradely, though very slowly, a sign of its having been disturbed in its motion in the past, or having been captured by the Sun, or having originated in a way different from that of the other planets.
That's the point. Jupiter spins this way, let's say. Venus came out of Jupiter. It's not going to spin the same way as Jupiter. It's going to roll out backwards. And it's exactly what happened. It popped out and rolled backwards because it's still got to push through all the atmosphere that's in front of it. So that's going to push it, but it's not going to push it to turn in. It's going to push it to turn out. So that's why Venus goes backwards. It's because it originated right out of Jupiter. Okay, let's go back at it. Here we go.
At the time of the Mariner probe, two prominent members of the American scientific community, V. Bargmann, professor of physics, Princeton University, and Lloyd Motz, professor of astronomy, Columbia University, wrote a letter to Science claiming for me the correct prediction of the great heat of Venus, of the radio noises from Jupiter, of the existence of a magnetosphere around the Earth. A paper, some additional examples of correct prognosis, written by me, was printed in the September 1963 issue of the American Behavioral Scientist. It contains a survey of various tests, confirmations, and supporting evidence. In that issue, sponsored by a group of eminent men in scholarship and public affairs, is also told the story of reception or rejection of this book, coupled with efforts toward its suppression. It was actually successfully suppressed while in the hands of its first publisher, who had to give it up, though a #1 national bestseller, under the exerted boycott of all this publisher's textbooks by certain groups organized for that purpose in some of the academic councils of the country. Some attempts were made to minimize the value of the crucial tests claimed and confirmations obtained. A prominent astronomer wrote in the December 1963 issue of Harper's, "As to the high temperature of Venus, hot is only a relative term. For example, liquid air is hot relative to liquid helium, whereas I claimed an incandescent state of Venus and a gaseous state of all hydrocarbons." Professor H. Hess, chairman of the Space Board of the National Academy of Sciences, volunteered to write me a letter for publication. Some of these predictions were said to be impossible when you made them. All of them were predicted long before proof that they were correct came to hand. Conversely,
for me, I had all the evidence to prove everything that I said, 100%, DNA, CAT scans, specimens, everything, which proves what he said. But he made all of these claims prior to having any evidence. So that's a tough place to be in any realm, because if you make claims, you better have the evidence. Now, he had all the documentation that said all that stuff, and it all made sense. So, but he was in a tougher spot than I am, I think.
I do not know of any specific prediction you made that has since proven to be false. If my premises are wrong, and only by sheer chance did I obtain such a score, then the theorists of probabilities ought to find out the odds involved. If, as some friendlier skeptics assume, the score is due to an unusual gift of intuition, then I should be accused of sorcery, not only of heresy. However, if the story is a reconstruction of events that took place and of logical implications of them, then the score is but a natural fallout from a single central idea.
And he was fabulous. Okay, I'm just going to go back to a video I did about 3 years ago about Velikovsky. I wrote this book, Mudfossils and Velikovsky and Minds in Collision, as I talked to you. I'm just going to play it here. This is quite long, and I'm going to comment, because things have changed since I probably put this up. Again, this is an evolution of understanding, and nobody's understanding because they will not let their mind enter this realm. So here's what I had to say back then. Here goes.
I don't talk about this much, but I did write a book, Mudfossils and Velikovsky and Minds in Collision. He wrote a book called Worlds in Collision. And wait till you see what they did to him. Same thing they did to me. Same thing they do to everybody that talks about truth. Now, before we get into Velikovsky's interview, I just want to tell you right now that everything is backwards now. They said originally there was a demarcation problem. He was pseudoscience, Velikovsky. He didn't have all the evidence they had. Well, he had all the evidence. They had none of the evidence, but they refused to watch and look at his evidence. He was presenting it. They refused. And they forced him to take his books off the shelves. Where do you see what they did to him? Absolutely disgraceful. Now, and they continue to do this to this day. And that is going to change today. Now, this is, I don't know what that is. It's some Jewish station, apparently, Yiddish or whatever they call it. It's only got 196 subscribers. And this is about Velikovsky. It goes back to 1964. Camera 3 it's called, and they're interviewing Velikovsky. Now I'm going to let this play in its entirety, and anybody that comes to Mudfossil University is required to view this. This is important because you will understand the predisposition of everyone that is in power. They hold the power over the people that are under them, and this is in every job, every.
Wow. That goes back 3 years. I'm saying the same things now, and nobody listens. I just did a rant about it, NASA and Fermilab and all of them. Yale University, nobody cares about the truth anymore. Not a bit, not a taste. The same thing back in.
Academia, people that are writing books, people that are giving tours, they don't want to confront or be confronted. Once they had to hold sway and power, they want to maintain that. And the peer review system is a way to protect each other from criticisms of reality. Now, and this is what happened to Velikovsky. And it's happened to me, and it's happened to everybody since forever. Since about 300 years ago, since the Great Enlightenment. They called this the age of reasoning, where we can reason through everything. No, they can't. They find a way to skirt through everything. Now, they can no longer do that with the evidence that I presented. Mudfossils it's not deniable. So, at this point, it's, you could look at it a lot of different ways, but I look at it, as a failure to do their fiduciary duty to the students. Anyway, and that's been going on forever. So here goes.
Years ago, in 1950, an amazingly unconventional thinker astounded the scientific community with a theory that challenged many of its most deeply rooted assumptions. In a persuasive bestseller, this man presented a radical view of world history that linked research and hypotheses in such diverse disciplines as astronomy, geology, comparative religion, and archaeology. A storm of protest arose from every corner of the academic.
Now, not only did he have all of that stuff, and I reviewed all of his research, years and years and years ago, I fully understood what he was doing, and I was appalled at what happened to him, and that really set me off probably to become the way I am. Now, just listen to this. It's really disturbing, to be perfectly honest.
Academic world, claiming that the theory was totally wrong. This opposition soon turned into an attempt to suppress the book and discredit the man who wrote it. The man is Immanuel Velikovsky, Russian-born doctor and psychoanalyst, student of the sciences and humanities, founder and one-time editor of the Scripta Universitatis series, out of which grew the Hebrew University in Jerusalem. For the last 25 years, Dr. Velikovsky has been resident in the United States, where he has continued his studies and advanced his theories. His first book was titled...
Now, I just want to mention to you, he knew Einstein. Velikovsky was not like an unknown somebody in the woods like me. He was in the scientific community, and they still destroyed him. Me, they just ignore.
Worlds in Collision. And that was followed by Ages in Chaos, Earth in Upheaval, and Oedipus and Akhenaten. Dr. Velikovsky's contention is that in the memory of man, the Earth has gone through great natural paroxysms. He's founded his theory on the ancient records of man from all over the world, on archaeological evidence in the form of ancient calendars that have become strangely obsolete, and on new and radical interpretations of information from astronomy, paleontology, paleomagnetism, and evolution. In addition, Dr. Velikovsky's theory has led him to re-examine prevailing views regarding the origins of religion, as well as those which form the basis of celestial mechanics.
Now, I don't think Velikovsky had access to the information that Sitchin brought out with the Sumerian text, because that led a whole new layer into the ancient tales and the Hebrew cosmology. Now, I believe he must have known about the Hebrew cosmology, about the seven heavens and all that business, because that was all written about too. And the earth has been recreated 7 times, and it goes through these make and break cycles.
And he also calls for a realignment of the chronologies of ancient civilizations. Well, the result of this wide-sweeping theory, as I've said, was a flood of very harsh criticism and ridicule. The scientific community was almost unanimous in rejection of his work. Jacques Barzun, Dean of Graduate Faculties at Columbia University, wrote just recently that the merits of the scientific issue do not alter the deplorable treatment Dr. Velikovsky's ideas received from the profession. The prejudging scorn and closing of ranks against the heretic showed typical guild animus. In recent years, however, evidence collected during the geophysical year and by several space probes has tended to verify several of Velikovsky's predictions.
Virtually all of his predictions were verified. Okay, I'm going to just try to shut up, which I have a very difficult time doing, so I'm going to let this play out. Here goes.
For instance, he had said in the face of strong disagreement that because of her recent birth, Venus is extremely hot, a view subsequently borne out by observations of Mariner 2. He was accused of inventing an interplanetary magnetic field, but one has been detected since then by Pioneer 5. He claimed in 1950 that the ancient civilizations of Central America were much older than believed. Recently, this view too has been proved by radiocarbon dating. All in all, a score of Dr. Velikovsky's predictions have been verified, and the opposition within the scientific community has abated. New voice.
Right. Before he goes any further, I am kicking back in again, and this is live right now. This is not 3 years ago when this video was recorded. Since then, I have realized some of the things he said I can't go along with, and some of the things he said I'm 100% certain of. Now, the things I can't go along with, I have physical reasons for that. And the things I can go along with, I have physical evidence to support. So my stuff is physical based on his research into the documentation. And again, this was not that long ago, my friends, not that long ago at all. He records this at about 1500 BC was worlds in collision. But there were several events in that time frame within a few hundred years. And the real bad one was the global flood that was reported in every single culture, including the Bible, including every one of them. So and they all talked about dragons and giants, and all of that stuff was real. All right, so here we go.
Voices are being heard. For instance, that of Lloyd Motz, professor of astronomy at Columbia University, who, while he still disagrees with Velikovsky, says his predictions should be recognized and his writings should be carefully studied and analyzed because they are the product of an extraordinary and brilliant mind and are based on some of the most concentrated and penetrating scholarship and research of our period. Here with us today on Camera 3 to discuss his theories with Dr. Velikovsky in his first television appearance is Eric Larrabee, an editor and writer whose articles about Dr. Velikovsky were the earliest attempts to make him familiar to a wider audience, and whose latest piece in Harper's Magazine has directed attention to a re-examination of the Velikovsky theories.
Now, let me make another statement. I know I said I'd shut up. I just can't do it. Velikovsky would never even be known by anybody, except for a couple guys stepped in. Once they destroyed him, it destroyed his books and everything. They actually took his book off the bookshelves 11 weeks in a row, #1. And the academics said, no, you got to take this off. And they did. And that started the whole controversy, and then they all sort of went down on him. But anyway, they're saying, let's take a re-examination of this. This is 14 years later. And all of this stuff is being proven out to be true. But they still came back with a secondary attack against him, which destroyed him once again.
Dr. Velikovsky, it's almost 15 years now since you first published Worlds in Collision, and in the years since you've published 3 other books, Volume 1 of Ages and Chaos, Earth and Upheaval, Oedipus and Akhenaton. And during this period, there has been the curious paradox that although the scientific academic community hasn't by any means accepted what you have to say, that fortune has smiled on you in many respects, and in the sense that science itself, point by point, has gone somewhat more in your direction. And also recently that one observes the phenomenon of the younger generation in the colleges and universities being more receptive to new ideas than the older. I was reminded...
All right, once again, I got to step back in. They cannot speak about his theories about Venus almost hitting Earth and all of the giants and dragons. They will be failed. They'll be failed in the academic realm. I've had this over and over and over told to me that I'm not allowed to even talk about that. I asked my professor, and he got kind of nasty. And so they're really afraid to. And you're actually afraid to talk to your friends and neighbors about this too, because it puts you in the wacko realm. But all of it was true, and he had the evidence, and he was destroyed just like I am, just like all of them are. You talk about truth now, and you're done.
Of a quote of Max Planck's, which you know as well, that new ideas in science don't actually become accepted. What happens is that the proponents of the older ideas die off and are replaced. When you look at some...
I think he actually said science advances one funeral at a time.
Of the things that have happened, some of the ways in which science has come your way, so to speak, and this much larger interest, much greater willingness to talk about your ideas in the colleges. How do you feel looking back on it? Which of the developments jump out to you the most? I remember you were saying once that you had never dreamed when you first were thinking what you should write about the planet Venus, that in your lifetime you would see something like the space probe Mariner, which successfully went within 20,000 miles of that faraway planet.
Just think if you could see the giant dragon and the giant fish in the desert in Morocco.
Now, I know that stands out to you as one of the events of this time. What in particular led you to be so concerned with what Mariner would find on Venus? With in particular the question of Venus's heat.
Well, you know, Mr. Lab, is that Venus is persona dramatis of my first book. In that book, I claim that there were terrestrial catastrophes caused by extraterrestrial agent in prehistoric and also historical times. And I tried to identify the agent. Well, Venus, the story of Venus as a protoplanet, occupies large part of the book. However, in the beginning of the book, for about 150 pages, I describe the events that were observed and left memory of them in so many historical and also folkloristic documents of old civilization of the records. Yes, and records. Now, you understand well that I had no personal means to send the Mariner probe. And so my hope and my prayer was that I should still have the chance in my lifetime, not only myself, but my opponents, I wish them long life, that they should be also witnesses of that probe, which now 2 years ago, I I believe it was August of 1962, was launched, and by December 14, I think it was 14,
Passed by
the date point.
Well, if I may be a devil's advocate just momentarily, I know what many of your critics have said is that a prediction like this is a matter of chance, and that they imply that you are pulling things out of the air. Well, obviously, you could have said a great many other things about Venus. You could have said Venus has 2 moons, or is made out of cottage cheese, or something other than saying that it is hot. What led you in particular to say, quite contrary to the belief of the time, that Venus was a hot planet?
Well, first I will say what I said. At the end of my book, in the very last 2 sections, before the section, the end, I put 2 claims. So the position which I selected for them in my book by itself proves the importance I gave to them. These were, first, Venus must be very hot.
Must be hot.
Must be very hot, is very hot. I called the chapter Thermal Balance of Venus. And I said, Venus gives off heat. Not as usually supposed to be. A planet gets so much heat from the sun and reflects so much heat in the space. It gives its own heat. Of course, if it is a body like other bodies in the solar system of 6 billion years or longer, older, of course, then you wouldn't expect that it would give still.
All right, here's where, and again, I'm sorry to butt in, but this was 3 years ago. Now, and I still knew this at that point, but I want you to fully understand the universe as we know it. We have no idea whatsoever how old it is, absolutely none. And all of these science communicators now are saying, well, the Big Bang Theory's out the window. It just doesn't work. They know it doesn't work, and light is not stretching and pulling away because they're all pulling the light away. No, it's slowing down as it comes to us because of all these fields that are in space. Now, what we need to do is listen to Velikovsky's complete works, and this is going to be a very, very long series, and I'm going to do it part 1, part 2, part 3. I shouldn't probably do much more today because I think I've introduced you to a guy that is talking about material evidence and what he suspected would happen out there, and the heat and so forth, because it was a new planet. Well, there's more to it than that, because it's spinning backwards, and the scrubbing through the particles that are in space, which now we know there's a quantum foam in space, and that is also something that's been absolutely tested, and it's there, which is all it is, and more is just light. Light that comes from all these luminous bodies is moving through the solar system or through the galaxy, and they flick on and off because they're getting hit out there. And they call it the quantum foam, flash on and off all the time. And those are the particles. And Venus is spinning backwards. That's why it's so hot. So he was very, very concerned about that, to talk about that. And you know, as we can see now from that one of these probes that went up there, that was very close to Venus, and took the pictures of the great red spot, and it is literally a female body part. And it has got some issues right now where it may be ready to give birth again. The red spot is changing drastically and has mounded up, and a whole batch of red stuff has been sloughed off, and in slabs, they call it. And they thought it was all going to break up and go away, but it's not. It's mounded up, which is normally sort of pretty close to the birth process. Okay, so here he is again about how important this particular forecast was.
By itself proves the importance I gave to them. These were, first, Venus must be very hot.
Must be hot.
Must be very hot, is very hot. I called the chapter Thermal Balance of Venus. And I said, Venus gives off heat. Not as usually supposed to be. A planet gets so much heat from the sun and reflects so much heat in the space. It gives its own heat. Of course, if it is a body like other bodies in the solar system of 6 billion years or longer, older, of course, then you wouldn't expect that it will give still give.
All right, I just want to say something about Velikovsky. Now, I appreciate everything he does, and I very rarely have any opposition to what he says. Now, he is saying Venus was born 3,500 years ago, and I agree with that because that's what he discovered in the text. Now, Venus also, he says, is extremely hot, and we know that is a fact. It's hotter than even he thought it was. Now, he's talking about it being a young planet, and therefore it has to cool down. And I'm sure that's probably a high degree of the heat. However, it is also spinning backwards. Now,
all right, so I did mention it this time. I suppose I'm just regurgitating what I said before, but nobody watched much of this, so here I go.
the right-hand rule gives off, it throws off energy. The left-hand spin gathers energy, and I can show that with my light research, and I have. And that backwards particle, it turns really hot. I'll show it right now.
I have come home.
All right, hold on a
and I have
second.
stood at the